Good to go? Very good. Thank you so much. All right. Well, thank you all for having me in. I've worked with several of you in the past. For those I haven't met yet, my name is Bethany Fischer. I am a rep with Terrazzo and Marble Supply. We are part of an independent rep group, Preservation and Protection Systems, PPSI. You guys probably have worked with my colleagues, Marty Fisher, Steve Gordon, Ryan Baker. We have 30 years of history representing commercial construction materials in the roofing, waterproofing, wall systems, and the interior finished spaces. So I run the interior line. My line card is on the table. My contact info is on the back side of it. Among other things, we do a wood product called Park Life. So I'll get to chat with you guys on that for a little show and tell in a couple months. But today, what we're here to talk about and focus on is Terrazzo. So as I mentioned, we are the reps for Terrazzo and Marble Supply. We have been with them for, we have been their architectural and design reps for 17 years now. So we've been with them quite a while. They are the industry leader, both nationally and internationally, in supplying all things to the terrazzo industry. So that includes aggregate, that includes materials, it includes all of the accessory products as well as divider strips and machinery and polishing pads and all of that good stuff that you need to actually install this on your projects. That said, we are not terrazzo installers. We are strictly suppliers. We work with a network of terrazzo installers. We always recommend working with a contractor who's a member of the National Terrazzo and Mosaic Association. You'll see as we kind of work through the program, if you haven't seen it installed on any of your job sites, it is a little intensive of a material going in, a little bit of nuances to working with it. So it's beneficial for quality control to have someone who knows how to work with this material and this product. Terrazzo and Marble Supply, we are headquartered in Wheeling, Illinois. We have a network of architectural and design reps from the West Coast over here to the East Coast. We've got warehouses across the country, including one in Baltimore, Maryland here, where we are strictly dedicated to terrazzo. We stock aggregate and we do small batch tinting there as well. So that's a great support for your more local projects, or your quick turnaround things. We stock most of our domestic marble chips there, so we can mobilize pretty quickly on some of these fast-moving jobs. Over 80 years of history in the industry, 100% owned. Our goal is to help you guys through the design process with this material. It's a very custom medium. It's a blessing and a curse in some ways because you have unlimited options, but sometimes those options as far as design can be a little bit overwhelming. We can provide support to you through the entire design process, whether that be custom samples, specification reviews, detail reviews, any unique conditions or execution related questions. We're happy to help you guys with through that design process. So when it goes out to bid, you get exactly what you're expecting from this product and this material. So with that, we will kick off the AIA portion of the program. We have some sign-in sheets floating around. This is good for sustainable design and health, safety, welfare credits. I can get IDCEC as well if anyone needs that. So this program focuses primarily on the sustainable nature of the material. We're going to look at different parts and pieces of the system and how they can contribute to LEED credits on your projects. Take a look at some LEED projects throughout the course of the program, review health, safety, welfare benefits of the material, design elements, takes a quick look at some precast. We'll talk about the design flexibility, different aggregate sizing combinations, and kind of nuances of different mixed designs. And then we have an installation video to show you kind of how this material goes in. So any questions during the course of the program, feel free to shout them out. That includes you guys on the remote end as well, feel free. So with that, we'll kind of move into some history here. So in the terrazzo industry, we like to claim credit, and we call ourselves the original recycled floor. The Italians really like to claim credit for this material, but the first known terrazzo install we actually found was dating back to 8,800 BC in Turkey. And this is the first time we saw the use of some clay aggregate put in a lime-based binder and take a patina over time for a flooring application. Fast forward a few years, 300 BC, we started to see the use of marble aggregate, marble bits, byproduct of stone and quarry related activities, working their way into that same line-based binder, taking a patina over time, and becoming a flooring finish. When terrazzo really started to take shape and become what we really associate it with today was really in Italy, and particularly the Venice area in the 1500s. We saw a lot of larger aggregate style installations. You can still walk through some of these old Venice buildings now and see some of the original flooring installations. And the photo on the left here is a scan of a text published in 1590 called Della Architectura. This is the first known drawing of a terrazzo system. You can actually purchase some first editions of these on eBay still. So if anyone has some cash to burn, it might be an interesting investment. I'm trying to get the NTMA to buy one, but it's very cool to see that history. A couple photos here of some old terrazzo systems that were uncovered during renovations, and one here in the center and the bottom that was restored. A little bit more modern history of terrazzo. The first known install here in the States was done in 1890. It was a Vanderbilt property on Fifth Avenue in New York. During this time period, we didn't have a huge labor force in place here in the States who knew how to work with this material and this product. So those furnished and installed prices were rather high. What started happening in the 1900s, of course, was the immigration of a lot of Italian artisans and craftsmen who brought the know-how and knowledge to work with this material with them here to the States as they immigrated. So we started to see more terrazzo showing up in our iconic buildings like the Radio City Music Halls and the like. It started to become more approachable from a pricing perspective. What started happening in the 20s, though, kind of changed the game for terrazzo. Prior to the 20s, terrazzo was hand ground using stones on a stick, or galeros as they were called. You can imagine how difficult and labor intensive this was. But what happened in the 20s? The invention of the mechanical grinding machines. This really brought those labor costs down and made it a perfect choice for our public schools, for our municipalities, some of these buildings where you want a high performing floor finish, but now we were able to deliver it at a price point that would work for those applications. Also interesting, one of the original sealers that they were using, and this is all, throughout history, one of the first sealers that we discovered, they were actually using goat's milk as a sealer for the terrazzo system. So I always find that fascinating. Terrazzo today, what are we seeing? Everything we talked about up until now was a cementitious binder or a lime-based binder. What started happening in the 50s and 60s was a transition to an epoxy-based binder, what we call the thin-set resinous systems. That transition happened for a number of reasons. Primarily the physical properties of a resinous epoxy binder versus a cementitious binder. We get tremendous compressive strength. We're at 10,000 to 12,000 PSI compressive. Tremendous tensile strength. We're around 4,500 PSI tensile. And because of that, we have a very high flexural modulus. We can pour very large panel sizes up to 20 feet by 20 feet without the need for divider strips. So you can have some larger pores and a lot more design flexibility. We don't have any volume change during the curing of these resinous binders, so you don't have any shrinkage cracking to worry about. So that has some implications on your design and also the long-term performance of the system. The other reason that the industry really moved heavily to the resinous systems, and at this point, we're probably somewhere around 90% of the terrazzo installed nationally today is a thin-set resinous system. Part of the other reason that transition happened was because of today's fast-track construction projects. Things are moving so quickly. These GCs are working many, many trades and phasing them in and out of these projects. The thin-set systems are much easier to work other trades in and around. We can prep the slab for the terrazzo. It cures in 24 hours. And then at that point, we see a lot of people put it under protection and have other trades come in, work around the space. Terrazzo guy may come back later, grind and polish and finish it out. So it lends itself to these crazy phasing schedules a lot better. In terms of aggregate today, we are still seeing, of course, a lot of marble. Believe it or not, that's your most cost-effective aggregate choice. We'll get into this in a little bit. We're also seeing granite, glass aggregate is a possibility now in the resinous systems that you didn't have with the cementitious systems. We get great bond to those glass aggregates with our resin. We're using, for divider strips, zinc, brass, or aluminum. I also see interest. We've been doing plastic strip for 25, 30 years. There's been a comeback to plastic strip lately where people want specific colors for their strip work and their patterning. So that's another possibility for you as well. And then down at the bottom here, we see two accessory materials. These are really critical to the performance of these thinset systems. The moisture vapor treatment and crack isolation membranes. Moisture vapor treatments are a topically applied primer that shut off vapor drive from the top side of the slab. We, as an industry, require below 80% relative humidity, according to ASTM F2170. We want to be below 80% relative humidity before we can proceed with the terrazzo installation. If we are not below that threshold, either we wait or we apply these moisture vapor treatment systems. They handle vapor drive up to 99% relative humidity and are very high performing. But it's something I call out and want to pay attention to because we recommend actually building these in for any slab on grade and or lightweight concrete conditions. That's where we're most often seeing these high moisture readings. You're very likely going to need it, and so it's best to build it into your base bid and specifications for those conditions. The crack isolation membranes, those are designed to handle some movement in the horizontal plane. So those are applied at 40 mils thickness. We can handle up to 1/8 of an inch in movement in the horizontal plane, and that's how we're detailing random cracks in the slab, control joints, any of our other construction joints, stuff like that. So, if we're comparing the two, both of them are crucial to the performance of these thinset systems. We don't typically require full coverage crack isolation membrane. In most cases, it's better just to detail cracks and joints. So I say call out moisture vapor treatment for slab on grade lightweight concrete always, and then just detail cracks and joints with the crack isolation membrane. Yep.
The moisture vapor treatment, how much does that cost a square foot? Because to keep the owner from paying for it if he doesn't need it, could it be done as an allowance?
So you can test for it. What we're seeing in the industry, and I know Brian and I have had this conversation along with Ben, are you on the line? I don't know. Ben?
Yes,
okay, good. I've had the conversations with these guys. So what we're seeing, there's one subcontractor down in North Carolina who likes to charge crazy change orders. This material should cost $1.50, $2 a square foot, furnished and installed. He's charging $6 to $8 a square foot change order. It's nuts. So because we most often see high moisture readings in that area, that's why we recommend building it in. If you want, you could just have them test according to ASTM F2170, but make sure your GC is doing a thorough review with his terrazzo subs to make sure he flushes out what they're going to be charging for the moisture vapor treatment, regardless of that relative humidity reading result from the test. It should, whatever their price is, should handle up to 99% relative humidity. So that's kind of the trick with it. So it's something where our goal is to try and flush out to avoid that nasty change order from this guy. Help protect you guys from that, because he ends up being a more expensive option in the long run. That answer your question? All right, so here we have a section of a typical thinset system. We've got our vapor barrier if it were on grade and intimate contact with our concrete substrate. This is showing a concrete substrate, but we have numerous options as far as substrate. If we are using a Thinset Terrazzo system, we can pour over existing epoxy terrazzo, existing cement terrazzo, quarry tile, we did that out at LAX Airport, or directly over quarry tile. Existing marble or other stone finish, we can flush that out. And marine grade plywood we can pour over. We do that often in elevator cabs. And then raised access flooring is an option as well. So you have some flexibility with our substrate. Maybe a potential savings there if you're working on a renovation and wanted to explore pouring over as opposed to demoing out an existing finish. That's something we may be able to do and save the money on the demo costs. So back to our section here, we've got, this doesn't show the moisture vapor treatment and crack isolation membranes. They're applied topically to that concrete substrate, set the divider strips for the terrazzo topping. Typical thickness is 3/8 of an inch. The only time we see them going in thicker is if we're using some larger aggregate designs, what we call Venetian Style terrazzo or the Maladiana Style terrazzo. So these are a much larger aggregate and require a thicker system to accommodate that larger aggregate. I get questions sometimes about, is 1/4 inch terrazzo a possibility? And yes, it is. But if we're, as an industry, we work to an 1/8 of an inch and 10-foot flatness tolerance with a 3/8 inch system. If you guys go to a 1/4 inch system, I would want to tighten up that flatness tolerance to avoid the risk of grind through. So any cost savings you might have from a thinner terrazzo topping is going to be offset by the slab prep in terms of flatness. So I say just go with the 3/8 inch. It works very well. That's most often what we're doing in schools, 3/8 inch thickness. So that's your best route from a budget perspective. Here we have a little video showing you the install. Any questions on the install? A couple things that I get asked sometimes. You saw them setting the divider strips and using a little bit of hot glue to tack it down. Temporary. It's set with epoxy, so that just temporarily sets the strip in place. The other thing, the grout coat. You saw them taking that same color resin and spreading it over the surface to fill in the little air bubbles or pinholes that open up during the grinding process. If you were looking at a finer aggregate system, what we call microchip style terrazzo, I recommend 2 grout coats for that type of system. The aggregate is fine, so when we polish off that grout coat, there may be some other little air bubbles or pinholes that open up, so we say 2 grout coats is the best bet for those types of systems. Any other questions on that front? All right. How is terrazzo sustainable? So first we'll take a look at the resins. The epoxy resins are 100% solids, 0 VOCs, no off-gassing before, during, or after installation. We have all of the health products declarations as well as environmental product declarations, Green Guard Gold certifications, and we meet all of those indoor air quality requirements. We tint the resin the same way you tint paint. So you can do any color you want. No minimums or upcharges for custom colors with the resins. Is there a question? Sorry, I thought I heard some. So when you're looking at a terrazzo sample, the resinous binder makes up about 30% of that. The remaining 70% or so is the aggregate combination. So the aggregate has a potential contribution for lead as well. We are pulling aggregate from, domestically, we have several quarries throughout the States and in Canada. Internationally, we are pulling aggregate a lot from Italy and Turkey as well. Turkey is a very cost-effective source for marble aggregate. In the world of recycled content, we're using both pre- and post-consumer recycled glass and also have relationships with stained glass manufacturers to take their glass, crush that, and use that as a aggregate selection in your mixes. So anything from, the recycled bottle glasses, the Heineken green, the Sam Adams brown, lots of clear wine bottles. I've contributed to that pile quite a bit. Lots of options on the glass front. If you are working to a very budget-driven project, I would stay in the post-consumer world. The colored glass and the stained glass, those tend to be at a higher price point. We are a lot more competitive with the clear plate glass and mirror glass and stuff like that. So using a little percentage, maybe 20% in a mix is manageable on some of our budget-driven projects. So that's a consideration as we're developing mix designs. In the center here, you see a photo of a large pile of toilets. This was taken from Kohler's facility out in Wisconsin. They have very, very tight QC standards. They have about 50% rejects for things like inconsistent glaze or a hairline crack in the finish or something like that. So they are able to reuse about 30% of it. We take the remaining 20%, we can crush that and use that as an aggregate in the terrazzo mixes. This is post-industrial, not post-consumer. You don't have to worry about anyone's dirty old toilets ending up in your brand new beautiful terrazzo floors. Recycled concrete, we have seen a little bit of that. I'm not a huge fan because it's very hard to control batch to batch the color. So we don't do quite as much of that. Here's a map showing quarry locations. Like I said, domestically, we've got several, and then internationally in both Italy and Turkey. There is one ship that's quarried in China. We don't tend to use very much of it. No worries about coronavirus or any implications on lead times. We're not really getting much from China in the way of aggregate. In terms of chip sizing, here we're looking at kind of a range of different options. So in the world of terrazzo, when we're talking about a standard terrazzo system, something that's installed at 3/8 of an inch, it would usually incorporate a combination of size 2, 1, and 0 in the aggregate world. So when we're talking about a microchip style system, that's going to incorporate size 0s and double 0s. All of this would be installed at 3/8 of an inch. When you start looking at the larger aggregate, anything sized 3 to an 8 or above, that's when we're starting to look at a 1/2 inch, maybe even up to an inch in thickness. So those are considerations, especially as you're looking at transitions to other materials and the like as you work through your design. Building reuse, this is a potential credit for LEED. We've seen some excellent examples of old terrazzo, especially in these schools, that has been refinished and resealed, and it looks beautiful just like the day it was installed. This here is an example of an installation from University of Pennsylvania, Silverman Hall. It was originally installed in 1900. The design team was building an addition upstairs on the mezzanine level upstairs, and they took inspiration from the original terrazzo floor that they, it was after this photo was taken, but they refinished and resealed, and they installed a more modern version upstairs with inspiration from that original design in terms of color and pattern. So always, you know, if you wanted to look at, we kind of budget if you're going to do some stock removal and repolish and reseal of existing terrazzo, it typically comes in around $5 a square foot. We'll say maybe 3 all the way up to 7, depending what you're dealing with. So that's what you would be looking at for doing some rough grinding to remove that old sealer and polish, grout, and seal, all of that good stuff. Lifecycle value. So this has not officially a LEED credit, but a tremendous implication when we're talking about sustainability. These materials are installed and intended, they really can perform and last the life of the building. We just saw a terrazzo install from 1900, so over 120 years, and it's still performing and looks great. What we run into in a lot of our budget-driven projects is the upfront furnished and installed costs. So we know we are a little bit more expensive than the other options, the vinyl sheets, the carpets, VCT, all of that stuff. But when you are looking at the annual cost of maintenance and then the potential replacement of that material, the annual square foot cost is actually going to be much more cost effective than some of those other options, particularly for the resinous terrazzo system. The National Terrazzo and Mosaic Association collected these numbers. They put out a document a couple years ago called the Cost Calculator, where they reached out to a variety of industry associations, got real-time furnished and installed pricing, and compared it to a number of other flooring finishes. So this is how these numbers came about. They broke it up into different zones because we know labor has an influence on our furnished and installed pricing. So this is the chart here for the Mid-Atlantic region. It's based on about 10,000 square feet of terrazzo, 100% marble mixed design. I've seen numbers come in a little bit below this. I've seen them come in a little bit higher. It's depending kind of what we're working towards, but this is a kind of a good average. We've got this same chart available every other zone in the country, so wherever your projects might be located, this is a good initial tool to evaluate where we're going to be coming in terms of budgets. The other thing we can offer, if you're looking at it as a potential finish and not sure if you're going to be able to support it budget-wise, give me the location and approximate square footage, and I will talk to local installers in that region and get some budget numbers from that directly based on that specific project. So before you invest too much time in the design front, that way we can figure out and anticipate about where it might be coming in. So that's another resource a lot of design teams take advantage of. Here we have the chart for the Southeast. Schools in Virginia, I've seen, you know, 50,000 square foot schools I've heard come in around $14, $15 a square foot furnished and installed. So the value for the board systems, you're getting the best value that we have seen in recent history for these board and plate systems. And again, all the maintenance benefits, no grout joints, and it's a lot more cost effective to maintain than some of those other options. So here we have a brief overview. We've talked about a lot of these already of the potential LEED credits based on B4. Repolishing existing floors is a potential for 2 to 4 credits. The use of recycled aggregate is 1 credit. Health product declarations and environmental product declarations, that material ingredient reporting credits. And then the zero VOCs and low VOC sealers for low emitting materials has a potential for 1, 2, 3 credits there. So So a couple lead projects, the lead gold, this was installed at Goucher College Athenaeum up in Towson, Maryland. Roman Mosaic installed this. It was an NTMA Honor Award winner a couple years ago. They installed two colors here, the gray field, and then there was a white that was kind of the nosing at the sit stair here. All of the aggregate was actually recycled glass. They used a combination of clear glass and mirror glass in this mix. What I love about this project is everything you see here is poured, ground, and polished in place. We have the ability to cast terrazzo on a vertical surface. So you can pour right up and over a plinth or these sit style stairs, no issues. There's various different grinding media to do the inside-outside corners. So you have some options available to you. It is installed at 3/8 of an inch, so we don't need to change the thickness at all. So this is a nice benefit to the material when you're looking for that poured seamless effect. So you're talking about the nosing? So they put a channel in, blocked out that space, and then came back and infilled it with the abrasive epoxy and sand abrasive mix. Yep. Those are the non-skin strips. Yep.
Is that a snap?
I'm sorry?
Is that a snap?
The abrasive? No, they mixed epoxy and sand abrasive aggregate and poured it into that that channel. Mm-hmm.
All the steps on concrete.
It was a concrete substrate, yeah.
For example, a stair open. Have any ability to pour those before something.
So you can pour onto marine grade plywood. We'd have to take a look at deflection and kind of some of the other structural considerations, but I think it's something we could explore. Any more questions? Another nice example of a lead project. This is the Duke Ellington School for Performing Arts, a charter school down in DC. Another lead gold project. They had two colors here, a white using white glass and a black using a combination of black marble and black glass. That was really only in the logo. They here actually did the monumental stair was done precast with precast terrazzo treads. But this stair here, you see it's on a slight radius. This was actually cast in place. So that is, again, leave it means and methods maybe in some cases, but sometimes it's more cost effective to go that route than to precast those elements. Breck 133, project down in Northern Virginia. The entrance to this facility is on the 4th floor. Beneath that main entrance, they have conference spaces and meeting rooms. So there was a concern from the design team about sound transmission and impact noise from the hard surface up above transferring down to those spaces below. We actually can offer an acoustical membrane where we take 100% recycled tires, crush it into a crumb rubber, and blend it with an epoxy-based binder, trowel it out at 80 to 90 mils thickness. And you get an acoustical value, a delta IIC of 12. So you get some impact value for your acoustics. Also added recycled content, so it's another boost on the lead front. It also doubles as a crack isolation membrane, so you kind of got 2 for 1 with that. Health, safety, welfare benefits. Looking at the resins themselves, they're a 0.01% absorption. These are very, very, very dense, very stain resistant inherently in their physical properties. The polished marble is about a 0.5, 0.6% porosity. So it has a slight amount of porosity to it. In most cases, we are sealing the surface though to make it impermeable to any of those topical stains or anything like that. For this reason, terrazzo in surgical suites has come back in a big way. We're doing quite a few of these around the country, here in the Mid-Atlantic, MedStar, Penn State hospitals, CHOP Hospital, a variety of different hospital groups are kind of turning back around and using these terrazzo systems for within their surgical suite. There's some chemical resistant urethane sealers that work very well and stand up against the harsh chemicals that they're using to clean between procedures, but it's a great finish for those applications. When we're talking about maintenance, the typical maintenance of this material is kind of dependent on how we finished the product and how we sealed it. So standard in the industry is a 200 grit polish with a water-based acrylic or urethane sealer. That's the NTMA kind of baseline standard. With this, we see standard daily dust mop, weekly damp mop or auto scrubber, and annually a strip and reseal of that sealer, whatever water-based acrylic or urethane. The sealer should be stripped and reapplied. It depends kind of on the traffic in the space, but you can, beyond 3 years, you've gone past the life of a sealer, so it really should be done at least once a year, maybe in the summertime for a lot of the schools in particular. We see in some applications, like this is the Chesapeake House Travel Plaza up off of I-95. These are open 24/7. Some of these, there's just not a realistic expectation to shut down that area and strip and reapply that sealer. So they move into what's called a permanent sealer system. There are a couple different manufacturers offering this type of system, and what they do is actually take the polish up from a 200 grit standard up to an 800 grit standard, and then they use a permanent sealer on the surface. And you're essentially maintaining that sealer. You're using this one system I'm familiar with has a 10,000 grit kind of pad that they use to buff it, and then they reapply sealer periodically if there are any wear patterns, but they're never stripping and reapplying that sealer. Beyond that, another step up, and I see this sometimes in Class A, is taking it up to above an 800 grit and eliminating a sealer altogether. With this, you have nothing protecting that slightly porous marble, so there is a little bit of a risk there. But if you have an elevated lobby or feature space that's not off of the main entrance and not particularly, exposed to some of the conditions that we see in like an airport or something like that, that might be a solution for you in terms of the way you finish it. When we are talking about slip resistance, that really is a function of how we are finishing it and what sealer we are using. That sealer on the surface is going to dictate the coefficient of friction. Manufacturers, they've all tested to the James machine in terms of non-skid to that 0.6 and 0.8 for ramps, that minimum. A number of sealer manufacturers have also started testing to the new ANSI 137.1 standard, measuring the dynamic coefficient of friction. So depending what direction you're moving, we can provide some sealer recommendations that fit those solutions. Here we see that all made to order, and whatever you specify for your flooring mix design, they can replicate that same mix for a precast for the stair. So this is a nice example of a tread only that's fully supported on the substructure. These are your most cost-effective solutions. We usually like to see these less than 2 inches. That's kind of the transition point. They'll do that with the exact same material, the epoxy binders and the marble or aggregate combination, whatever you choose on the floor. Beyond 2 inches, they might recommend going to a cementitious binder just because the costs of the materials are higher at those thicknesses, about 2 inches. Another example from Johns Hopkins, the Wilmer Eye Institute. tread riser combo unit with our riser integral to the tread, again, fully supported. This is a nice example showing you the ability to polish open faces. So if you have some glass railing or any exposed elements, those of course are very easily workable in terms of finishing those faces for you. Structural tread only here. This is an example from University of Delaware. They cast, you can kind of see it here, a lip on the back side just to make sure they work to that maximum 4-inch open riser design per code. Again, these can be done to match your flooring, mixed designs. This is a structural tread unit. So these are great if you are installing a stair where it's open to the underside and you want to see terrazzo encapsulating that entire tread unit. You're going to want to go with the structural piece for that. Another example of a structural design, what we call a teardrop style tread. In this case, it's cantilevered on 2 I-beams, about 3 feet on either side. With the structural tread only, we can span about 6 feet without the need for a center support. So the one I showed you before, we can go about 6 feet. And then here, a center support gives you a maximum of 3 feet on either side. Logo work, anything you want with colors. Give us a CAD design. We can replicate that for a logo. Very simple, very easy to do for lots of schools, government buildings, all of that good stuff. We've seen some art and public places funding. This was a project down in Silver Spring where they actually had a contest and a local artist from Silver Spring came up with this design, this mandala pattern here, and we worked with him to come up with individual terrazzo blends for each of those colors. So it was a really nice kind of tapestry in the floor. This won an artwork award with the National Terrazzo and Mosaic Association. Nice example of vibrant resins artwork in terrazzo. This is a nice example also of artwork in terrazzo. Pittsburgh Airport, they had an artist from Carnegie Mellon design this. He paints all of his artwork as if he were laying on his back looking up at the sky. And so he took that same inspiration as he was designing the terrazzo patterns for the floor, featuring a lot of the Pittsburgh skyline and those elements. This was a job of the year with the National Terrazzo and Mosaic Association a couple years ago. So design flexibility of the material, you can see by changing up the aggregate size, you can evoke very different aesthetics with your mixes. You see a lot of kind of fine aggregate looks, what we call, again, that microchip style terrazzo. This is a law firm in DC. 2 colors here. A nice alternative to polished concrete because we know the epoxies are much more crack resistant than the cement or concrete is, and you have a lot more control over color and consistency. So it's a really nice solution on that front. U-Line Arena is another great example of a LEED project. This was actually where the Beatles first played when they came to the United States. This whole facility was repurposed, and I love this project. This is the entrance to the Class A office spaces. They actually inlaid this planter within the terrazzo. It turned out absolutely gorgeous, and I love it. They actually used a little bit of recycled stained glass, these little blue bits of the aggregate. There was a custom 3-inch zinc strip that they had made to capture the perimeter of this planter to keep everything in, and also if the soils or whatever got moved around, it wouldn't expose any of the CMU and epoxy and sand what they have underneath of it to make sure everything was perfectly level and registering perfectly. MGM Casino, hospitality applications, really nice designs here. If anyone's been down to the new Carnegie Library, that historic renovation down in DC at Mount Vernon Triangle. There was a hand in that by a certain technology manufacturer. They use white terrazzo here with a white marble aggregate in that whole space. Really nice design here, very crisp and clean. Venetian terrazzo, again, things are kind of coming full circle. What we started with in our history, we're kind of coming back to that in a way, seeing a lot of interest in these large aggregate looks. This was from a lobby in DC. They actually kind of did a mosaic where they took the Italian red Verona chip from the border color and set each individual chip in epoxy about a foot off of that border, and then used the Venetian terrazzo as kind of and filled in that field color and ground and polished everything together. So really nice install. This is what we would call Palladiana style terrazzo. Valentino's flagship store on Fifth Avenue up in New York, they literally used it everywhere. It is stunning. If anyone's up in New York next time, pop in and check it out. They featured it in Architectural Record a couple years ago, and it's since then kind of become a tourist destination. I was up there for a meeting, and I popped in to look at it. I walked in, and the security guard up front looked at me like, what do you want? You're not going to buy anything here, I can tell, so how can I help you? I was like, I'm here to look at the terrazzo. He's like, oh, you're one of those people. I was like, yeah. So he took me on a tour. He was very hospitable. She pointed out everything to me, but definitely worth the trip next time you're up there. This was actually the one project in this program we haven't been involved with. They had an Italian artisan come over from Italy to install this. Stunning, it's gorgeous. They have Palladiana, the really large, chunky style terrazzo, kind of a mosaic almost, for the precast panels that they use to encapsulate the stair here. And then on the main floor, they used a poured-in-place Venetian style system. So really cool. And then another example, one of my favorite fine aggregate microchip projects, the Glenstone Museum. Has anyone been over there yet? Pretty awesome, huh? It's like perfection. I've never seen anything executed like that. The design team here started out looking at polished concrete, but we know concrete cracks and you have no control over the color. There's going to be a lot of modeling, and so they didn't want any of that. They wanted it totally monolithic and seamless. So we went to a 3/8" Thinset microchip system. Also interesting here, you probably noticed they didn't have any metal divider strips. What they did was used a plastic strip as a pour stop. And when they came back the next day to initiate the next pour, they ripped away that plastic strip and offset the next panel by about 1/8 of an inch. They came back and infilled between those two with a custom color joint filler. So they eliminated the divider strip altogether. Very unusual detail. This is, I've only ever seen it done on this project. There was a lot of cost that went into the substrate prep on this. If you walk the job, you'll see it is absolutely perfect and so flat. I have never seen anything executed. It's just stunning, every single detail of this project. So go check out Glenstone if you haven't been there already. But yeah, that kind of wraps up the program. I mean, this material, it's so much fun to work with. Every single project is different. We love to help you guys with custom blends on your project. Take advantage of its flexibility. Any questions you have on details or any technical related items, let us know. We are here to help you guys in any way we can. So any pushback you're getting from your clients, let me know what we can do, and we'll find a solution for you. We have so many universities and institutions that once they transition to this, they love the material and they'll standardize around it. So a lot of time we get that initial pushback about furnished and installed costs up front, pays for itself very quickly, and they recognize that value. So let us know how we can help. Any questions? Fire away.
Question in Charlottesville.
Yes.
You touched on the difference between polished concrete and that you get less cracking and more control over the colors, but how does the install cost compare? And then like maintenance cost over time, polished concrete versus terrazzo?
Well, the maintenance cost should be significantly better because of the densities of the epoxy resins. We don't absorb sealer like those concrete systems do, and so we're generally much less expensive to maintain, not to mention the stain resistance and the crack resistance inherently with the epoxies. You asked, in terms of the furnished and installed costs, I've heard numbers from polished concrete, and you guys would probably know better, somewhere around $9, $10, $11 a square foot. Is that accurate, or are you seeing something different? I've heard kind of numbers all over the place, but if we can get the square footage, and if we can get the GC to turn over large portions of that area to the terrazzo guy at a time, they can really streamline their phasing, and that really helps our furnished and installed numbers as well. So, we're probably looking you know, it depends on our square footage. Give me a square foot amount and I'll get you some budget numbers for it. So, but the trick really optimize your mix design. If we're really working in tight budgets, keep the mixes all marble or do your field color all marble, and then maybe any accent colors. That's where you might incorporate some glass or something like that. But the aggregate really has an implication on those costs. So it's something to pay attention to. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
I was just wondering,
so it's sustainable design and health, safety, welfare, SD and HSW pronouns. We've got SD and HSW. Any other questions? All right, awesome. Thank you guys so much. Yep.
It's good product.
Fun material.